I thought that it was a great value. It was only $50 for 16 hours of brilliant people saying brilliant things about a bright future. And so how could I miss with that? I think I have 4 major roles to play. The first is that I wrote the first book on 4G wireless broadband, which to me is the convergence of computers and communications, and leaving basically the computer industry in complete control with Moore's Law and Metcalfe's Law and Rutgers Law and everything else going full blast, an exponential change, and pointing out how communications fits into that whole measure and how to change policies and regulations. The second contribution I have to making the singularity happen bigger and better than it might without my having lived is through IPv6, Internet Protocol version 6, which is the wholesale rip and replace of the 32-bit, 34-year-old IPv4, which is the Internet as we know it today, with the 128-bit, about 10-year-old IPv6. And I've been doing conferences on that and started the first publicly traded company that focuses on IPv6 software and conferences and all the things to make that happen. A third way is to sort of, I've made, over the last 10 years, for fun, I've kind of made a bit of a hobby or part of my professional expression to look at what Ray Kurzweil was doing and say, how do you get from here to there? So at, for instance, a Foresight Senior Associates meeting, I gave a talk on how do we get from here to there with Ray Kurzweil's future. I like Ray Kurzweil and his ideas, and I want to say, okay, here are the specific things. So I started a company dealing with wearable computers. I've done augmented reality, you know, the future of the internet and so on, in part because I was inspired to make Ray Kurzweil's ideas. The last one is I want to start a religion, because I think it's very important when people die that they use their money to do things that will help bring about a better future. A friend of mine who knows the Pope was rubbing his hands and licking his lips with glee because he was told that all the Catholics, so many Catholics are going to die, that they are going to leave $750 billion over the next 30 years, basically the time period that Ray Kurzweil is talking about the singularity happening. So I would just ask you as a listener, which is more useful, for that money to all go to the Catholic Church or to that money to all go towards making benevolent artificial intelligence that has the ability to go and terraform worlds? And finally, I guess I can call it a fifth contribution of this, but it relates to all the other ones, which is that to me the wellspring of conceptual breakthroughs comes out of science fiction. So I wrote a book called The Future Engine, How Science Fiction Catalyzes Business and Technology. And the basic idea is that all of this in the Singularity Summit, it is science fictional. All the things that people are talking about are science fictional, and yet that's not a bad thing. It doesn't make it less real. It's just important to know that most breakthroughs don't happen in research labs. They happen in prose, in novels and short stories, occasionally in comics and graphic novels first, and then people years later invent them in the lab because they were intrigued and they had the conceptual breakthrough in the first place. So to point out the science fictional contribution of all this. Most of what I've heard today, I've heard years ago in David Zindel novels. Neverness, The Broken God, Wild, and The War in Heaven. And it's funny to me that people don't make very many science fiction references that are modern. They make old ones to Isaac Asimov and to other people, but they're really much more contemporary expressions of these ideas that relate it to cosmology, to eschatology, to religion, spirituality, finance, and so on. So I think it's important to recognize the sources of a lot of this material. Well, I think that at the moment there is something I would say it's the memetic equivalent of the Oklahoma land rush. There are people who have forecast what people will be talking about in the future, and they want to sort of seize that territory. The Oklahoma land rush resulted from the Homestead Improvement Act, which said that if you could grab 5 acres, mark it out, and then you could continuously occupy it for 5 years, you owned it. It was yours. And so I see that in, for instance, the new and improved Isaac Asimov laws of robotics. I don't know that they're necessarily an improvement, but it's sort of a a strategic choke point. So you want to grab that conceptually. And I also find I wish there would be less on the whole morality of things, because I think there's a little bit of pretentiousness in the nature of someone saying, well, here's the morality of something here, when in fact what they're sort of doing is saying, look at me, I'm more moral than you because I'm imagining the morals of something that doesn't exist yet. Isn't that cool? Aren't I great? Aren't I spiritual and wonderful? And I sort of think that when people do that, it's going to create less cooperation and less conviviality, less community than there might otherwise be around going and co-creating something. Also, if I want to just take a completely different tact, I've had my own sort of religious vision. Maybe it's just something like Philip K. Dick and it's just a hallucination. But the idea is that humans are here to create AI, and the purpose of the AI is to create a God, and that God will have a choice. And this is the greatest choice that will ever affect humanity and anything else, which is the choice to create a universe that is in a parallel reality to this one, that leaves this one to go follow its own, the life and death cycles of stars. In other words, we have tens of billions of years, possibly more, for this universe to go. Or it could overwrite this universe, just like you can overwrite files on your hard drive. And so ultimately, I think that's the choice we have to make, is to train the AI to respect this universe, this plane of existence, this reality, and not overwrite it once it creates the God that can do all these things. The greatest hope is that humans have a level of cooperation and collaboration and transcendence. And I guess the greatest hope is that the Charles Stross view from Accelerando, in which we turn all the inner planets in the solar system into computronium, and then we use it to use as a computational substrate for trillions and trillions of uploads and new creations to have their own kind of intelligence explosion. I think that's a great hope, and that we can transform and basically become, have the ability to transform ourselves into light, beam ourselves into other places at the speed of light, or even something greater, but I'm happy with the speed of light, and then reassemble ourselves as this consciousness and something like this body, and be able to travel through the stars that way. So that's my greatest hope.